Listen to everybody speaking, and I'm feeling grateful to be here, but also completely unqualified. And I'm not going to do a lecture, and there's going to be no quotes from anybody, except from me. I'm basically just going to tell you a story, really. So the question was, what is identity? Who are we? Where, and related questions. And to me, what is identity and what is your identity is really about where do you feel at home? You know, where do you feel you belong? What is your home? So I was going to tell you a story about myself that's going to take about 25 minutes, 20 minutes, depending on how fast I speak, and is going to cover about 50 years. So it starts actually on May the 16th, which is I think this weekend, but back in 1974 actually. And that was the weekend, and that was the date when I came to Britain from Pakistan. I think I'm losing people as I'm speaking here. This is not good at all. It's going to get better. So my dad had come from Pakistan in 1963, and he was the only one out of his family who had decided to leave Pakistan and go to Britain. And he basically decided because he wanted to have a better life. And he came in 1963, and he left my mum, who had 2 children at that point, my older brother and my older sister. And my older sister was 18 months old, and my older brother was 6 months old. And, I mean, think about that. I mean, think about having 2 children that young and deciding that you want to leave them and your wife to go to another country. And he used to say later that the reason he left that early is that he wanted to leave before the kids could start speaking to say that they missed him. And so he left, and he came and worked in a factory in England. And for 11 years, he would send money over to my mum, and then during one of those times, they came back, and that's when I was conceived. And then in 1974, they finally had the money for us to come to Britain. Now, the reason I tell you this story, part of it is, this question of who are we and what our identity is. We like to think that it's all about us and the decisions we make, but it's not really. A lot of it is luck, because my dad was the only one out of all of his siblings who had the courage, the ambition, the desire to leave Pakistan. So now, I'm here now, and I've been flown over to talk to you, and I've got quite an interesting life. How much of that is my talent, and how much of it is just sheer good luck that my dad was the guy out of all his family who wanted to come to Britain? Because when I go back to Pakistan, into the village near Lahore, and I see my cousins and their kids, who are all in abject poverty, am I better than them? Am I cleverer than them? Am I more talented? I don't know if I am. Who knows? If one of their if their dad or their mother had come over, maybe they'd be the one speaking to you. Identity is not always about what we do, it's about what's also done to us and the luck we have about that. So growing up in England in the early 70s, my dad raised us to believe that we were Bikestani. We happened to live in Britain, but that was an unfortunate accident as far as he was concerned. We were basically Pakistanis, and that was the world in which we lived. So all our friends, all the people that he worked with, all the people he lived, who hung out with us, they were all Pakistani. And I was basically raised to believe that all the best values were Pakistani Muslim values, and all the worst values were white British values. And so they basically said, if you can just try not to spend any time with them at all, because they have different values. They don't even look after their parents. They look after dogs better than they look after their parents. They don't really know how to eat food. They don't cook properly. Just try, you're in Britain, but pretend you're not. Pretend you're in Pakistan, basically. And so I was brought up to believe, you're Pakistani. So if I wanted to, I didn't speak English to my family. I had to speak in Urdu. If I tried to listen to pop music, he was like, what are you listening to that for? You should be listening to Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. You should be listening to Muhammad Rafi. This is your music. What are you listening to these white people for? And so that was my identity as a young kid. Pakistani who happened to be in Britain. As a teenager, I obviously rebelled because that's what you do if you're a teenager. And I was like, well, obviously my dad is talking absolute rubbish. And so I then decided that everything he thought was wrong and everything that I stood for was in opposition to him. So I basically said, no, I'm not Pakistani, I'm actually British who happens to have been from Pakistan. And there's nothing wrong with British values, and actually, this is the country we're in. You guys are the past. I want to live in the future. So during my teenage years, I got into an American musician called Bruce Springsteen, and that did not go down very well with him at all. And I just kind of found, I just rejected a lot of the other stuff. I had a very bad experience that happened when I went to university, where I decided I was going to get dreadlocks. So I had hair extensions put into my hair, and I had these really long dreadlocks. This was in my early 20s. And I bought myself an electric guitar. And I remember going back to Luton, and it was the first time that he'd seen me, and I looked like sort of Lenny Kravitz or something, you know, with like these big dreadlocks. And he looked at me and he just said, when are you going to take your hat off? Because he didn't really get that at all. And so it was all about me just proving that he was wrong. So that was up to my early 20s. So if you'd asked me at that point what my identity was, I would have said British / Pakistani. That's kind of where I was at. In May 1995, so this same month, but now in 1995, I'm living in Manchester, and I've graduated from university, and I'm just living there, and I get a phone call saying, come back to Luton immediately, your dad's had a heart attack. It was completely out of the blue. We drove through the night, got to the hospital, and basically my dad had a heart attack, and for 6 days he was in a coma, and then 3 days before I turned 24, he died at the age of 62. And this was obviously a completely shattering experience for lots and lots of different reasons. But one of the things that happens when you have a father who dies, or a mother, is the person that you're arguing with, the person you're rebelling with, is no longer there. And then suddenly you start having to have a conversation with yourself because they're not there to argue with. And so I got myself into a very lost place because I was like, I was trying to develop and I was trying to grow, but at the same time as that, I don't have this other person to bounce off. And I felt very, very lost. And those were just incredibly, incredibly dark times. And I just felt like I didn't know who I was. If you'd asked me who I was at that point, I think I'd have just thought I was lost. And at that time, I was working in journalism. I was working for a news organization in Britain. And it was around about a couple of years later, 2001, 9/11 happened. And the interesting thing about 9/11 for me was that it was one of the first times when I was sort of reminded that my Muslim identity was also part of who I was, because I'd always kind of focused more on the Pakistani side of things and the Asian side of things than the Muslim thing. But suddenly, everyone was starting to talk about Muslim stuff. So then I became really aware that I actually had a Muslim identity as well. And I became Pakistani, British, and Muslim. And all three of those identities started playing together. Are you still with me? Yeah? Okay, good. Vaguely enjoying it so far? Okay. It sounded a bit muted, but never mind. So that's kind of where I was, and that would have been my identity. But the thing is, there is always a little bit of you that feels that you're not fully off this country when you're living when you're brown and you have an unusual name And you just always know that it's a bit fake to try and pretend that you just feel like you're trying too hard to kind of claim to be something that you're not. And I just never tried. I just never wanted to do that. I always felt nervous about claiming to be more British or more English than I was. Because you know the question of where are you from, which people always talk about, where are you from? What I found very interesting is I would get that question from Pakistani taxi drivers as much as I would from white people. And they wanted to know what village in Pakistan I was from. And I was like, man, I'm from Luton. I'm not from a village in Pakistan. So where are you from was always a question. And I realized that even right through to my 20s, there were still things that made me nervous. So one of the things was the England flag. The England flag just felt creepy. I just thought if you saw someone or you saw a house with an England flag, chances are they were possibly a thug, And football matches scared me. I'm 50 years old. I've never been to a football match. It just makes me feel a bit dodgy about that. Football fans with England flags is even more dodgy. When I was a kid, we used to live quite near the football ground, and we were told Saturday afternoons you stay at home, you lock the doors, and you don't go outside because the football fans will be rampaging through. So I've always had that as a sort of a worry. Now, as the years carried on, I started becoming more involved in journalism. I started writing newspaper things, I wrote a memoir, and then I started having a little bit of a moment when I realized, this thing, because my dad had always gone on about Pakistan being this amazing mythical place, everything was always great there. They treated their parents great, and then there was no crime, and everything was amazing. Not so amazing that he didn't want to leave as fast as he could, but apparently still amazing. And it was around about in my 30s, I suddenly thought, this is really weird, but everything I have achieved in this country, everything that has ever happened has been because of English people. They're the ones that gave me the jobs. They're the ones that hired me. They're the ones who are all my friends. Why am I holding on to this mythical idea of a country that I know absolutely bugger all about? And I started feeling a little bit more British because I thought, there's something else going on here. The story of identity evolves and grows. It's not static. And I thought, well, for the last 20 years, I've been giving this country a hell of a lot of my abilities. I've been writing, I've been making documentaries, I've been doing all this. I have been feeding into this country's culture. So whatever the culture was at the beginning that I might have not been very happy with, I'm actually trying to make it better, for God's sake. So I felt more plugged into the country because I felt like I was actually contributing and adding something to it. So that was feeling okay, but there's still, if somebody had asked me, are you English, I'd have said no. If somebody had asked me if I was British, I'd have said no, I'm British Pakistani, and I'd still have been a bit cagey. So then I was getting to about my mid-30s, and it was around about then that my mum started gently hinting that it was time for me to get an arranged marriage. When I say gently hint, she went on a hunger strike, and it was quite stressful at the time. And so she'd basically do things like I would come home, and there would be phone numbers of the parents of random women who apparently may or may not have been eligible, and she would sort of hint that I should give them a call. And then I would come home, and she'd be telling them, oh no, he hasn't got, it's not a staff job, but he has regular work, and things like that. She'd be sort of trying to sell me not very well. And my older brother was even worse, because he would say, really, he's quite blunt, and diplomacy is not his strong point. And he'd say things like, well, the truth is that now that we don't have a dad, some of the really top-ranked girls are not going to go for you anyway. So you really have to just get what you can get at this stage. So I was getting quite a lot of this kind of tension going on. And there was a lot of talk about, finding somebody in Pakistan. My mum would say, look, I know you're busy, but the person we'll find, she's not going to be fussy. She'll do anything you want, this sort of thing. And none of this really appealed to me. And so I was feeling confused and I was feeling lost. And if you'd asked me for my identity at that point, I would have said, I'm Pakistani, I'm Muslim, I'm British, but I'm also uncomfortably single. And that would have been my prime identity at that point. And so then I'm going to the Hay Book Festival, which is this book festival in Britain on the border of England and Wales. And I'd gone there to sort of interview various authors at the festival. And it had a really interesting creative time, but I was deeply depressed because it was coming up to my birthday. I was going to be 37. And I just felt like life was passing me by, and I was just going to be left like the sad, lonely man when all my mates were starting to settle down. Some of them had already started to have their first kid, and I was just like terrified of that singleness and loneliness. So I remember feeling miserable at the book festival. And then on the last Sunday of the festival, which was the 1st of June 2008, I have to get back to London. And so you have to get this train from Hereford, which is this train station. And so I'm in a car and in a taxi, and I'm getting to Hereford station, and there's a lot of traffic. And so the taxi gets to the train station, but it's like 2 minutes till the train's going to go. So I've got this luggage, and I'm running up the stairs, and then I'm running to the platform. And I find the train's there, the doors are about to open, and I just like dash through the doors. And the doors shut, and I'm sweating, and I'm like feeling yucky, and I'm looking like a Mexican vagrant because I haven't shaved for a while. And then I go and sit down, and I plonk myself onto the seat, and I just look up, and sitting opposite me is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. And I'm like, I never get this kind of luck. And so I couldn't do anything about it because I'm not really that kind of person. But after about 2 hours, I sort of said, did you go to the festival as well? And she had. And so we just started chatting. And what was really great is that because it was a train journey and because I looked really, really unappealing, I didn't have any there was no agenda. I wasn't trying to be particularly interesting or cool or anything. I was just like having a conversation. And I was even more brusque than I am usually. And I'm pretty brusque at the best of times. And so I started chatting to her and stuff. But then she started just telling me little bits about herself. And they were just really interesting things. And I was like, she was a speech and language therapist who worked with autistic kids. And I was like, my God, my job is entirely narcissistic. All I do is wang on about how great I am. And you're doing something that helps other people. What's it like to be that good? You know? And so I started hearing more about this. And as the train journey was moving towards London, I was just like, oh man, I'd love to see this person again. But I didn't want to be like some weirdo asking for her number. So when the train finished, I said, look, I would really like to see you again, but I don't want to be kind of like that guy who asks random people for phone numbers. So I'll give you my phone number, and if you want to contact me, you can, but I can't contact you. I don't even know your name. And so I just left it like that. And that was on a Sunday. And then for the next 3 days, I stared at my phone, and then on Tuesday, she contacted me and said, it was really nice to talk to you, and would you like to see each other again? So we went for a date at Tate Modern, and 2 years and 2 months later, we got married. And that was a very, very beautiful day, except for one thing, which is that my family were absolutely shocked and appalled by the idea that I was marrying somebody who was not a Muslim and who wasn't Pakistani. They went absolutely mental. And they basically said, we're not going to turn up at the wedding. And I said, she's a really lovely person. Why don't you want to meet her? And my mum's like, there's no way I'm going to meet her. She drinks. We haven't got any alcohol in our house. And I said, well, yeah, she drinks, but she'd be happy to have a cup of tea in our house. I said, no, absolutely not. So my brother and my older sister didn't turn up at the wedding. And at that point, my identity was Pakistani, Muslim, British, but also an ostracized son. Disappointed son, a disappointment. And then about a month or two later, my mum started to sort of spend some time with my now wife and started really liking her. and so I hugged her. And then after about 6 months, they became really close. And I said to my mum, why is it that I remember you saying to me that this woman could go to Hajj 7 years in a row and she would never be accepted into this house, and now you're hugging her like she's your long-lost daughter? And my mum said, yeah, that's when you told me she was English, but she's actually Scottish, so it's okay. And then the next year, my daughter was born, and we called her Layla. And after that, a couple of years later, my little boy Ezra was born. And so if you ask me my identity now, yes, I'm Pakistani, yes, I'm British, yes, I'm Muslim, I'm mostly a dad, and I'm mostly a husband. And the interesting thing about that has been that Belinda was talking before earlier about, wanting to know who you are and how much. And the thing is, I know so little about my past. I know about my parents a little bit. I know nothing about my grandparents. I have no idea where our story goes. There's no paper trail of anything. It's just a mystery to me. The past is a complete mystery, which is why I am obsessive about writing things down about now. So I've kept a diary since I was 9. I photograph things, I write letters, I've written poems, I document all the time because I want to leave my children a paper trail of who I am in a way that I don't have with my dad. And the interesting thing is that having children has also anchored my relationship to Britain, because these kids, they are absolutely in this country. A couple of years ago, my daughter and I were on a bus, and some random person was looking at my daughter, and because she's got a sort of a brownish skin color, but not very dark, I think this guy was a bit confused. And they said to my daughter, who was only like 4 at the time, oh, where were you born? Which I thought was a rude question, really, to a 4-year-old, And my daughter, Layla, she just looked at this person and said, where was I born? I was born in a hospital, of course. And the other thing that's been really interesting is they have made me feel more confident about saying that I am actually British. And I just wanted to leave you with a little story, which is last year there was a football championships, European football championships, and I was picking my little boy up from kindergarten, and we were on the bus, and he suddenly said, Daddy, I need a wee. And I was like, God, can you wait till you get home? No, I need to go now. So we stopped at the nearest bus stop. And I was like, where can we go? So he goes, what about there? And it was this pub. And because it was the football championships, the entire pub was covered in England flags. And I was like, do we have to go in there? And he's like, I need a wee. So I was like, okay. So we went in, and there was like a load of England football fans in there, all wearing the Union Jack T-shirts and everything, all drinking. And I should just tell you at this point that my little boy, this was last year, at that point he was obsessed with wearing dresses. So not only was he going into a pub full of England flags, but he was wearing a little dress as well, just because he's got his older sister and he loves his sister, so he was wearing a dress at the time. Anyway, so he's wearing this curly-haired monkey of a boy, wearing a little dress, goes into a pub full of England flags, with England flag. And he looks up, and if he looks at the flag, and he just says, first thing he says is, that's my flag. And I thought, wow, that is the journey of my life. From having grown up when I was his age, being terrified of football fans, of never even thinking I could say that, to having him completely and reflexively say, that's my flag. And I think that what that tells me is that the story of identity, the story of who we are, is a changing story. Some of it is about luck, who we are born to, the things we do. Some of them are the choices we make. But if you ask me now what's my identity or where I feel at home, it isn't a geographic thing. I genuinely feel at home when I'm with my family. And if I'm in my family anywhere, that's what gives me a sense of home and my sense of identity. I hope that was interesting to you. Thank you.